So recently, a news story, or recently as of this recording, I should say, of the week of, or not just the week, but the day of March 12th, 2025, since people may watch this later, I happened to stumble across a news story from today put out by Time Extension. And it caught my interest because it relates to a thing that came up recently in the tabletop role playing game space. There is a sort of retro inspired professional wrestling video game in development that is called Ultra Pro Wrestling. And it's developed by a company called Hyperfocus Games, a Scottish studio. And it's a game inspired by the various Aki Pro Wrestling games for the Nintendo 64, like WCW NWO Revenge and No Mercy. I've covered one of these games already on Nintendo Power Retrospectives. I plan to revisit and cover the later games that they've done further on. Honestly, part of the thing holding off Nintendo Power Retrospectives to its extent is I'm waiting on getting Ultra not Analog 3D rather is the correct name of it. So that handles some of the save data management nonsense. So they are planning to do a successor game to this the classic wrestling titles developed by Aki. I have no objection with that part of the thing. I always appreciate when someone is developing a title based on a classic aesthetic or just general game control style and game series that has fallen by the wayside. If someone was to develop a retro clone wrestling game inspired by the original PlayStation WWF SmackDown titles, I'd be all for that as well. I think those games controlled very well, and I enjoyed playing them. That's neither here nor there. In any case, this game series inspired by Aki's titles. Aki, as a company or as a trademark, is no longer really a thing. Much of the staff of Aki has started their own company or moved on to a different company called Thin Sophia. Sin spelled SYN, and is lowercase, Sophia is capitalized. Now, this is an issue because the developer of Ultra Pro Wrestling, Hyperfocus Games, has purchased the copyright for the logos for Aki and has filed for a trademark. Aki and Aki USA, and has filed trademarks for them, so that they can then promote the game as being developed by or released by Aki and include that branding. And I have issues with this on multiple respects, and this is where the tabletop connection comes in, because what happened recently in the tabletop role playing game space is a gentleman who, I'm using that term loosely, a person um purchased, when they discovered the copyright had lapsed, the copyright for TSR Hobbies, the original publishers of Dungeons and Dragons and numerous other games, the Dungeon board game, the there was a Lord of the Rings Battle of Five Armies miniatures game, of course, Top Secret and Top Secret SI, Metamorphosis Alpha, all that stuff. All these classic tabletop role playing games that helped launch the genre, Gangbusters, all that sort of thing. And they purchased the copyright for various TSR logos. Not the, what I guess here, the end of life TSR Shield logo, but like the TSR logo that's drawn to look like it's a dungeon map, the wizard logo, that's one of the earlier dragon logos, that sort of thing. And he started a role playing game company called TSR, and it was heavily in pushing titles that leaned, frankly, to the far right, politically, often containing racist, misogynist, homophobic, ableist content. Which, in latter case, like, yes, while I'm a white guy, I'm also on the autism spectrum. I've publicly talked about my experiences with autism on this channel in the past. That's no secret. And so, if nothing else, the ableism side of thing, kind of not great. None of it is good, but the ableism part, like, hits me where I live. Um, So with all of that in mind, it's like, okay, I'm not a fan of this company, what they're doing, and I don't appreciate them attaching the TSR logo to or the TSR branding and consequently TSR legacy to the products they're making. Not help with the fact that as some of them slowly came out and trickled out, people got their hands on them, and in addition to the racist, misogynist, homophobic, ableist aspects of them, they also kind of sucked. They also weren't good games. It's the people realized like earlier on that not only did they not were they just kind of trying to pander to a right wing, conservative, fashy leaning audience, they also were doing the fash grift thing. They weren't where they're doing minimum effort for for not good products and the hope people just buy them to give money to someone who said the right leaning things. The right leaning things, if you know what I mean. And but in that instance, for what it's worth, and that's not very much, there was at least one person who was adjacent, loosely connected to TSR, the original TSR, who was involved. They got Ernie Gygax Jr., now sadly passed, who got on board for the project. I say sadly passed. I had no personal attachment to him, but I follow Luke Gygax on various social media platforms. He generally, from what I have read of his stuff, is a very decent person who does not have right wing leaning political views. In fact, opposed um, the this faux TSR company at every turn, um, and fought back hard against them alongside Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast because like a level one fighter who played by an overconfident player, he decided to bully a dragon and got flicked into or even not even a level one fighter. We're talking a level one basic D&D mage. 1d4 hit points, terrible saving throws, terrible armor class. I played that character. I know how combat effective they aren't. And they bullied, and with their weak character, they bullied a dragon. They fired their magic missile for 1d4 plus 1 damage, rolled a 1 on that d4, and the dragon went click, and that went badly for them. There's a full thread on EN World getting into this. I'll put a link to that in the show notes alongside the time extension article. And while I will say that from what I have read, the developers of Ultra Pro Wrestling, Hyperfocus Games, do not appear to be doing the um, fash graft grab. They don't even have that tiny little bit of a connection to original Aki. This is a bunch of white guys who bought the branding of a Japanese company, uh, in the hope to glom onto their legacy and in the hopes of getting people to spend money on this title based purely on the name without thinking necessarily, without hopefully looking further and realizing that none of the people who were involved with Aki are actually involved with this game. This is not Aki Returns. Um, by comparison, like the AEW wrestling game has far more of a continuity of history with the WCW and classic N64 titles or the WWF N64 titles than this does. Um, there's and just go check by people involved, and that's kind of the problem. When you're doing a game and you are trying to borrow the legacy of a name, of a company name, if you're scammed to spend the money because this trademark and copyright has lapsed, like part of the point of the idea of trademark from all the way back to its from the origins of the term, where we're talking like hundreds of years for this, is the idea that the trademark represents the craftsman, the people who make the product, and that by having that trademark attached to it, you are representing and signing your name to it as a craftsperson. And off over time, this got watered down. Tiffany, for example, uh, Tiffany Jewelers, Tiffany, the guy, wasn't by a certain point is no longer involved in the actual day-to-day design of the jewelry and production and that sort of thing. Like even to the point where the Tiffany family was still involved and still somewhat adjacent to the design process, by a certain point, it's they like the Tiffany family has had as much in common with the actual design and production of their jewelry as well Edison had with much of the inventions that were coming out um of his properties and of his factories and that sort of thing. That they were being invented by other people, and Edison was putting his name on them and claiming credit and royalties from those. And that was how he made his money. So, but at least Edison was adjacent to the process. At least Tiffany was adjacent to the process. He was in some way connected. Um, and I bring this up as well because when it comes to software and game development, we are in a weird point from with the history of games, of video games as an art form, where you have titles of these certain periods that had these relatively smaller teams, and when and thus having a name attached to it as trademark attached to it for a publisher or a studio, especially a studio, has meaning and had meaning. Origin Game Systems had meaning because knew that you had Lord British working on these games, Chris Roberts working on these games. They had this legacy of quality attached to people who made them, and thus one of the reasons that people objected when EA decided that their game client was going to be called Origin and have the Origin logo in a bastardized form is you're attaching a name with legacy to it, but not only was it not connected to making these well-regarded games, also none of the people who were involved in that are involved with this project now, and you also kind of pissed all those people off, and you either fired them or they left. And this is even worse than that because, again, I reiterate this, but it bears repeating over and several times over. Hyperfocus Games is a studio by a bunch of white guys who really enjoyed Aki Games' work, which is why they put all their effort into making this title, but with no staff connection, with no proper endorsement from the creators for these games. That sucks. That's a crappy thing to do. That's a crappy, not just for like as for the consumer, not just from consumer advocacy for me, the person looking in the Steam marketplace, looking in the PlayStation store, looking on the shelf at an independent video game store, or seeing an email from Limited Run Games or something like that. Not just from my perspective as a consumer. It is crappy from the perspective of the people who were at Aki, who were involved in the game industry, and who still are. If anyone should be buying the trademark and copyrights the logos of Aki, it's not this company in Scotland. It's not Hyperfocus Games. It's Sin Sophia. It's their history, their legacy that they are carrying on under another name at their company. And if anyone should hold that copyright and copyright for those logos and hold the trademark for those names, it should be those people who have connection to that history. And if anyone should have that name, Sin Sophia should. And if Hyperfocus Games really wants to take a deep breath and step away from the controversy that they have perhaps unintentionally spurred up, even though their current titles, many of them are rhythm games, often arcade rhythm games. Many of them have connections to like Pretty Cure or that sort of thing. If they're not necessarily wrestling games anymore. If they really want to let the people who have that legacy keep that own that legacy, they should transfer those copyrights and trademarks to Sin Sophia. But at no real cost. Just hand it those, basically fork it over. Say, hey, We done screwed up. We made a bad call. You are the proper successors to this legacy in terms of staff and company and that sort of thing. Here you go. That, I think, would be the best option for them under this circumstance.
Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe. And also consider backing my Patreon. Patreon backers get episodes up to 1 week early of this show and any future Let's Plays. Also, please consider backing my Ko-fi. Toss me a few bucks also helps support the show, and it's not a monthly obligation or anything like that.